right, welcome to Cwic Media's Come Follow Me series. We are covering Genesis chapters 42 through 50. Several chapters here to go through, so we're going to get right into it. Let's go right into chapter 1, verse 1. So here we have Jacob saw that there was no corn in Egypt, or grain. It's probably wheat, mostly wheat. And so he's going to send his sons, right, his 10 sons, not including Benjamin here. He's going to send the 10 sons to Egypt to get the grain. Now, these are important to understand. These are all the 10 sons that conspired against Joseph when he went up north from his home to go get them, as his father had asked him to do, to find out what they were doing, when they were going to be back, if they were okay. And the 10 of them conspired to put him into the pit. Some wanted to kill him. Some wanted to sell him. So that's an important thing to understand, because that's where the reconciliation is going to happen here, right? So Benjamin doesn't go because he's the youngest, and Jacob does not want to send him in case something happens to them, right? It's not, it's a dangerous thing to be traveling out there in the wilderness. You don't know who you're going to run into, what might happen. And he doesn't want to lose another son, another young son. So Benjamin stays behind. Now we get to verse 6 here, and we're going to start seeing some allusions back to something, and that is the dreams. And I think that this is important to remember, again, as we pull together the Book of Mormon and talk about the Book of Mormon, we should look, I think, my estimation here is that Nephi is writing not only, as we may have heard before, with the theme of the Exodus, because his family is doing something very similar to what the children of Israel were doing coming out of Egypt. The Lehites are coming out of a wicked Jerusalem, like Egypt, and then going through an Exodus to a promised land also. It's the same thing. It's written in that fashion. But it's also, if you read these chapters on Joseph, you can see just, Nephi pulling from these pretty strongly, right? The Lehites are a combination of Manasseh and likely Ephraim. And so they are Josephites. And you see this in First Nephi so much, where they have the angelic host talking to Nephi and giving him the prophetic vision of what's going to happen to his people in the future, combined with the Nephites, right? And it's pulled from the Old Testament to some degree. And he writes very similar in his own character. He writes his own character very similar to the character of Joseph. The reason I bring this up now is because there's going to be these allusions back to the visions of Joseph that he had, the two visions he had about his brothers. One of them was at least with his parents also, where he was going to rule over them, just like Nephi was to rule over Laman and Lemuel. And I think that that's key to the story here with Joseph, in understanding these visions, these dreams, as being an integral part of who he is. They tie that very strongly to him, where he is, in essence, it seems to me, that Joseph is a visionary man, just like Lehi. And I think Nephi does this on purpose, bringing this out. But here in verse 6, we get this allusion to these dreams that he had before he left and went up to find his brothers. Verse 6, and Joseph was the governor over the land, and he it was that sold to all the people of the land. He's in charge of the grain. And Joseph's brethren came and bowed down themselves before him with their faces to the earth. So this is the first place where we see this, where this is the fruition of this prophetic dream interpretation that Joseph had. And so you can imagine what this would be like. I mean, Joseph has been gone for roughly, I think it's been 22 years is about right? About 22 years that since the time that he was thrown into the pit. And now he sees his brothers. Now you can look at the brothers, and maybe if it was one of them, you'd be like, is that Reuben? Wow, he was he was a middle-aged guy or a younger guy before. Now he's all gray. There'd be it's like, is that him? He's gained a few pounds, maybe. Is that him? But when you see all 10 of them together, it's pretty simple to recognize who they are, right? And imagine his recognition with this, as he's been in charge of selling all this grain to the Egyptians and to all of those travelers that come into Egypt to buy the grain. He is, all of a sudden, there are his brothers coming in to buy the grain. What would be going through his mind? I mean, that's you couldn't write a movie any better than this, right? So he sees his brother. It says in verse 7, and Joseph saw his brethren, and he knew them, but made himself strange unto them, and spake roughly unto them. And he said unto them, whence come ye? And they said, from the land of Canaan, to buy food. Okay. So then we come down here. Joseph knows who they are. The brothers don't recognize him. Again, 22 years. Who knows what he's got on his head, a headdress, or other things. And Joseph's going to look very different from being a teenage boy. And Joseph, in verse 9, and Joseph, here we get the illusion again back here, and Joseph remembered the dreams which he dreamed of them, and said unto them, ye are spies, to see the nakedness of the land, ye are to come. And they said unto him, nay, my lord, but to buy food are thy servants come. We are all one man's sons, they say. We are true men. Now, the way we ought to look at this, and I've seen this misinterpreted by people who I know interpret things really well. But you can see here, when you look at these verses in the KJV, right, in the King James Version, you're going to see these insertions that are italics. The italics don't have a direct word in the original Hebrew, in the Old Testament. So they are inserted in the translation as this is likely what was meant. Right? So the issue here is not saying that we are men. I just heard this today, as a matter of fact. So I don't, anyway, we are true. We are true. It's not that they are true men. That's kind of the way it was, but we are men of integrity. That's what they're saying. We're true to what we are telling you. That is what they are saying, right? Thy servants are no spies. It's pretty obvious when you look at it like that. Just had someone who I have a lot of respect for in their translation abilities talk about how they were true men, as if that meant that they were like, yeah, I'm a warrior guy. It's very odd to me, but it's someone who was, of course, trying to fit things into a certain agenda. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. And then the brothers say to Joseph in verse 13, and they said, thy servants are 12 brethren, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan, and behold, the youngest is this day with our father, and one is not. Joseph's up there sitting there thinking, oh, really? Right? Okay, I wonder tell me more about this guy who's not, right? So Joseph says unto them, that is it that I spake unto you, saying, ye are spies. Hereby ye shall be proved. So he's going to try them. Now, again, we can pull this all together and look at this in a way like the plan of salvation, where Joseph becomes, in a way, a savior figure. And here they're going to be proven. And they need to be proven, right? These are the brothers that threw him into a pit to die or be sold as a slave. So Joseph says, by the life of Pharaoh ye shall not go forth hence, except your youngest brother come thither. Send one of you, and let him fetch your brother, and ye shall be kept in prison, that your words may be proved, whether there be any truth in you, because that's what they're talking about, that's their truth, their integrity, or else by the life of Pharaoh, surely ye are spies. And so he put them all together into ward 3 days. He holds them basically, and he says to them again, if ye be true men, what is really being said there is more directly, if you're true, if you're honest, let one of your brethren be bound in the house of your prison. Go ye, carry corn or grain for the famine of your houses. So he tells them, go back to your land of Canaan, bring your youngest son. Of course, Joseph wants to see, it's his only whole, full brother, right? And it's the only brother that didn't betray him. It's the other son of Rachel. So that's how they're going to prove him. They're going to be sent on a task. to go and bring their youngest brother back to them while one of them is held in Egypt. So one of them is imprisoned, held as a bargaining chip, so to speak. And then it's kind of interesting how this plays out here in 20 and 21. He says again, but bring your youngest brother unto me, so shall your words be verified, and ye shall not die, right? And then in verse 21, it goes right into the brothers responding, almost like they have to get this out. They're going to be very, very honest with everything. So they're going to bring up Joseph, not knowing that they're speaking to him. In verse 21, and they said one to another, we are verily guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the anguish of his soul when he besought us, and we would not hear. Therefore is this distress come upon us. So they're discussing this back and forth, and they're like, what are we going to do? This is payment. We lost Joseph, and now we may lose another. And so they argue back and forth. Reuben says, hey, in verse 22, do not sin against the child. Didn't I say this? And you would not hear. Therefore, behold, also his blood is required. There's got to be payment for this. So Reuben is the one who had said no. It was Judah who went to say, well, let's sell him. Let's get some money out of this. That's not what happened, but that's what Judah was. That was his position back then. So he's going to fill a different role here in reconciling back with Joseph. So here in 23, this is also interesting. And they knew not that Joseph understood them. So they're going back and forth in their own language, in an ancient Hebrew Semitic language that normally an Egyptian would not understand. For he spake unto them by an interpreter. So Joseph is speaking out to them in Egyptian and using an interpreter to talk to them, giving that much more the appearance of this not being someone that would be close to them, not being Joseph. But what's interesting here is Joseph speaks Egyptian. And we may not always think of that in our minds, but that's important to understand with the Book of Mormon. Because, again, if you go back to the scholar Don Bradley, as he postulates, Joseph writes his own record. And this is a very important thing, right? You've got two important chiefs, so to speak, in the tribes of Israel. And that's Joseph, who has the birthright and is the heir. And then you have Judah, who's told that he's going to rule, at least temporally. And so those are the two sticks that are going to be brought together. Well, what is the stick of Joseph? Is there context around that? The stick of Joseph is the Book of Mormon. But what is the precursor to that? What launches all of that? Well, it's perhaps Joseph's own book that he writes. So he's writing in Egyptian his own record, perhaps on papyrus, right? And then that gets moved down to Ephraim, likely, the heir, and then moved down from there, probably to Joshua, who's an Ephraimite, who's the one that brings the children of Israel actually into the land of promise, into Canaan. And then, very possibly through second-hand accounts anyway, of those that were close to Joseph Smith when he was translating and receiving the revelation for the Book of Mormon, very possibly down to Laban, who would be holding the brass plates, which may not have been engraven by Joseph, but would have been copied at least and put into the brass plates, engraven into the brass plates as a heritage, because Laban would be an Ephraimite and in charge of the record of Joseph, written in Egyptian. We know the brass plates were written in Egyptian because we're told that in the Book of Mormon. So then, of course, the Lehites, Lehi and Nephi and others, carry on this same tradition because Joseph of Egypt, is their ancestor. And that is their heritage. That's their spiritual heritage. And so they're writing in Egyptian. That makes an awful lot of sense. And again, it's a huge connection from here down into the Book of Mormon. All right, so Joseph, we'll move this along a little bit more, the story along here. They take Simeon. Joseph fills their sacks with the grain, puts their money back. They don't realize this, puts their money back that they had given to Joseph to purchase the grain, and then they leave. And then they find out that their money has been restored, and this scares them quite a bit. All of them have their own money. Jacob sees this also when they get back to Jacob, and they're very concerned because otherwise they're concerned that this viceroy in Egypt, who's in charge of all the grain and has all of this great power, is going to think that they left somehow grabbing their money back when it was supposed to be left with Joseph. And so Jacob now is not happy about this situation at all. He says that we're told here in verse 36, and Jacob their father said unto them, me have ye bereaved of my children. Joseph is not. All right, these are the 9 brothers that have come back here now. Joseph is not, and Simeon is not, because he's back in Egypt, and you will take Benjamin away, right? So they come back and tell Jacob, we have to bring Benjamin. This is part of the requirement to prove ourselves that we are truly there to purchase grain, and we're not there as spies. And all these things are against me, he says. Now Reuben stands up and says, look, I will watch over him and in fact slay my 2 sons if I do not bring Benjamin back with you. So they're stepping up in a sense, right? There's if we look at this again in a way where they've gone through all of these problems, Reuben is one of the ones, if you read those chapters, where he actually slept with one of the handmaids of Jacob, right? I mean, he's got some sins he's got with him. And so he's trying to make amends here. He's trying to change things. In a way, he's offering a sacrifice by saying he's going to give up his 2 sons if necessary so that he can do 2 things. He wants to save the whole family and bring all of the grain back. They've got to do that. They know they have to do that. Don't forget that in the story, just because we're talking about Benjamin on one end and Simeon on the other. They have to have the grain or they're going to die. And then number 2, Simeon is left back there and they've got to bring him back. So he's stepping up for the whole family here. Now in verse 2 of the next chapter in 43, this is kind of interesting because it looks to me like there's quite a bit of time that passes here before they go back. Because Jacob's basically saying, no, we're not doing this. In a sense, he's saying, I'm not giving up Benjamin for Simeon to some degree. But we're told here in verse 2, and it came to pass when they had eaten up the corn or the grain, which they had brought out of Egypt. Remember, they were full sacks. Their father said unto them, go again, buy us a little food. So it's not until their hand is forced because of starvation coming around the corner that they actually decide that they're going to head back to Egypt. And so Judah reminds Jacob, look, we can't go without bringing Benjamin. And Judah says to his father Jacob, look, we're not going unless you give us Benjamin. That we can't go. We're not going to come back. None of us are going to come back if we don't bring Benjamin. And Jacob, or Israel as he's called here in this verse, says, wherefore dealt ye so ill with me, as to tell the man whether ye had yet a brother? It's like, why did you tell him that there was another brother back in the land of Canaan? And then, it's interesting that they bring this up. Why bring this up? Well, it goes back to that idea of being true. They're being honest instead of being deceitful and deadly and doing all the things that they've done before. I believe that is what is being pulled out of the story here. So that we see that there is recompense. There's redemption. And then who steps up here? As he was talking with Judah, Judah is going to sacrifice himself in a couple of different ways, a couple of different times. And again, Judah's the one who's going to sell Joseph. Verse 8, and Judah said unto Israel his father, send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, right? They're going to starve. Both we and thou and also our little ones. I will be surety for him. I am making myself, and I'm creating an oath here. I'm saying that this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to watch him. I promise you I will bring him back. Of my hand shalt thou require him. If I bring him not unto thee and set him before thee, then let me bear the blame forever. This is a very different Judah than what we have seen in the story of Tamar and the story of Joseph in the pit. So Joseph agrees. Finally, he finally breaks, and he says, okay, we don't have a choice. And he's actually going to say, okay, grab the double of the amount of money, just in case that was a real problem, and some additional gifts for the viceroy, for Joseph, and take these with you and present them to him. Okay, down to verse 16. They come back with Benjamin to Egypt. They stand before Joseph, and Joseph says to the servants, bring these men home and slay and make ready, for these men shall dine with me at noon. So kill the fatted calf, so to speak. And so now the brothers are all very afraid. Why is this guy bringing us into his home? Right? This is odd. This is strange. And they think that they're going to be killed or made servants at this point. Okay. And then down in verse 26, they're at the house. Joseph comes into the home. Eventually, they bring him the presents, which was in their hand, into the house. And again, the allusion to the dream that Joseph had. And they bowed themselves to him to the earth. So this is an emphasis in talking about what? It's talking about hierarchy. It's talking about the dream that Joseph is the heir. Joseph has the birthright. This would be critical for an understanding and identity to the Lehites, because remember, when in the Book of Mormon, when early on in the land of Nephi, right, when Nephi separates from Laman and Lemuel and others and the families there, they separate, they go to the land of Nephi first. And in the land of Nephi, they are there for some time. And eventually, it's apparent that the Nephites become wicked. Maybe a majority of the Nephites become wicked. And so what has to happen is that Mosiah, the grandfather Mosiah, is going to bolt from the land of Nephi and take with him those that are righteous and they're willing to follow him, because they're afraid that the Lamanites are going to fall upon them. And apparently they did end up doing that and may have slaughtered the Nephites that were left. That land later, that land is then going to be possessed by the Lamanites, and that's where Zeniff eventually comes back to that land of Nephi. And then his son is King Noah, right? But Mosiah, leaving the land of Nephi, taking his band with him, his who knows how many people, kind of like leaving Jerusalem, or it's another Exodus, and they find a new promised land, so to speak. What is it? It's Zarahemla. Well, when they get to Zarahemla, of course, the Mulekites are there. Who are the Mulekites? They're descendants of Judah, more than likely, or a good portion of them are. Because Mulek is the son of King Zedekiah, a king directly descended from David. So you can think about the political dynamic that goes on from then on, right? Where we have, toward the end of the smaller books, before we get to Mosiah, and then starting in Mosiah, we get really a fuller story after Nephi of having the Lehites or Nephites and the Mulekites combined together, with the Lehites, Nephites being the minority, but being in charge and ruling. So what we have is Joseph ruling in the Americas, so to speak, the family of Joseph ruling over the family of Judah in the Americas, whereas in in Canaan, you originally have Judah ruling over Joseph. until finally there is a split after the death of Solomon, and Joseph, right, the Ephraimites basically take control of the rule of the northern kingdom, and Judah retains the rule of the southern kingdom. So a lot going on there. But this would be something that, would be close to the Nephites and those that were directly descended from Nephi, as they pulled from this here, more than likely, I would think, in talking about maybe this is our right to rule and convincing the Mulekites, at least a good portion of them, that the Nephites should rule. So back to Joseph here, and the brothers. Joseph asks if Jacob is still alive. And here in verse 28, they answered, "Thy servant our father is in good health. He is yet alive." And they bowed down their heads and made obeisance, right? So there it is again. It's very clear that the author is wanting us to see this. This is important, that Joseph is the ruler and that he has the prophetic gift and that it comes to fruition. So Joseph raises his eyes, sees his brother Benjamin, and said, "Is this your younger brother, of whom ye spake unto me?" And he said, "God be gracious unto thee, my son." And Joseph made haste, for his bowels did yearn upon his brother, and he sought where to weep, and he entered into his chamber and wept there. It's interesting because this does also, if you're looking at some of the other stories like with Noah and Enoch, you have the Lord weeping, right, and as well, and this might be an allusion to that a little bit, as the way that this story is told. Again, Joseph becomes kind of a savior figure. This is also, by the way, if you look at the story of Israel, of the 12 boys up through the end of Genesis in 50, this is a lot of that can be written. You can see it as being written in a chiasmus, and this is the very center of it right here. This reconciliation with the brothers, seeing his brother Benjamin here, and then weeping about having his brother back with him. Again, it's like a meeting at the veil, kind of, in some ways. It's bringing everybody back. It's covenere, right? Bringing together. Then in verse 33, and they sat before him, this is at dinner, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth, and the men marveled one at another. What it looks like to me here is that maybe Joseph set this up. Did Joseph set up the way that they are going to sit? This is a very common way to do this in the Middle East, anciently. And in fact, in the Last Supper, you'll see that the disciples are sitting in a hierarchical structure. And it goes from the most senior to the least senior in throughout the table. And as you reread it, you can... There's some articles and even, I think, a YouTube video out on this. Very, very interesting, the way the structure would be set up and how they're sitting in a hierarchical structure. But Joseph knows this already. So if this is the case here, how does Joseph know? Obviously, they're probably thinking, is this why they're marveling one at another? I think it is. How does he know how to sit us according to our age? In verse 34... And he took and sent messes unto them from before him. That's the meat. But Benjamin's mess was 5 times so much as any of theirs. And they drank and were merry with him. Okay, so Joseph, again, this is his full brother being Benjamin, and Benjamin didn't throw him into a pit. This is the end of part 1 of this week's Come Follow Me. You can look for part 2 shortly.